Let me get these glasses off. I can't see anything now. Anyway, so I recently did a video on the differences between APS-C cameras and full frame cameras, really with the idea that presenting the fact that APS-C cameras take great pictures, and I think influencers on YouTube are pushing this full frame thing, basically saying if you are even serious about being a photographer, you have to have full frame, you have to have super megapixels, you've got to have all the best lenses, and it's just nuts. Now, I will tell you, as I did in that other movie, is that I have full frame cameras. This is a 5D Mark IV. Great little camera, takes great pictures. I use this often when I'm doing professional work. Could I use a different camera? Could I use a smaller sensor camera for the work that I do? APS-C or Micro Four Thirds? Absolutely I could. Why don't I? Well, because I have this, and I'm a camera whore. I mean, I have to admit it. I am. I love the fact that it's big. I love the fact that it's big in my hands. I love the fact that I have these big buttons that I can press. I love many things about this camera. When I'm doing professional work, I don't even know I don't even feel the weight of it. But you take this exact same camera with me on vacation or on a hike or backpacking or even a little walk, and it feels oppressively heavy. So I'll often use different cameras for those situations. And in 2011, I was introduced to Micro Four Thirds cameras. And that was because I wouldn't take a big DSLR on a trip, on a vacation with the family. It was just too much of a pain. I would take like a little compact camera, but they had their limitations. And I found the EPL2, the Olympus EPL2, bought it, little rangefinder style camera, absolutely loved it, absolutely loved the image quality, and I was hooked. Now, I told you, I have full frame cameras. Here's a nice APS-C size camera. It's a Sony Alpha 6000 series. I also have Micro Four Thirds cameras, right? Because I'm a camera whore. So this is a pro level body, pro level lens, Micro Four Thirds camera. This is the Olympus OMD EM1 series. This has a fixed aperture 2.8 equivalent of, I gotta look, glasses gotta go back on again. Okay, this is the equivalent of 24 to 80 in 35 millimeter terms lens on it, and this really tiny body. Compare that to this, much smaller, much lighter, much easier to manage. I also can show you this little OMD EM10 series camera. So this has many of the features of its bigger brother, even smaller, with this little pancake lens on it. This pancake lens is the equivalent of 28 to 84. Not like a variable aperture, but look how small that is. Really tiny. Takes absolutely awesome pictures. So let's get one thing straight. If you are a professional, or if there are professionals that use full frame, there are professionals that use APS-C, and there are professionals that use Micro Four Thirds camera sensor sizes. So we can assume by that all larger frame interchangeable lens cameras, probably really all larger sensor size cameras, Micro Four Thirds, APS-C, full frame, take superb pictures. They have excellent low light abilities. They have excellent dynamic range, and they can all blur the background. So those are things that everyone kind of talks about these guys about, right? But all of those cameras can do it. And you don't need 50 megapixels, right? You probably need, honestly, you probably need 10 megapixels. But I'm not going to go there. I know there'll be other people that will disagree with that. So let's look at the differences and why, the talking points that you often hear about these cameras. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the APS-C size cameras because I did that before, but assume that in most cases, an APS-C camera is going to have slightly better specs in this regard. It'll also have some negatives, but slightly better specs than the Micro Four Thirds camera. So, full frame camera, great low ISO or high ISO performance. Works great in the dark and low light. Probably in my abilities, I'd say 12,800 I will use. I don't like it, but I'll use it. Other people might have very different standards. APS-C, stop less, 6,400. Micro Four Thirds, probably around 5,000. So just a little notch below APS-C. Still great though, right? I mean, my first DSLR went up to 1600, and I thought that was horrible looking. So this goes up to over 5,000. I'm pretty happy with that. Dynamic range you're hearing less and less about. Yes, certain sensors have more and certain sensors have less, but let's just assume that most sensors have very adequate dynamic range, although you might see differences not only based on sensor size, but also on sensor technology. So generally speaking, people say that Canon cameras have a little bit less dynamic range than a camera that has a Sony sensor, for instance. These are not huge, massive sorts of things, even though if I underexpose something 5 stops and then bring it up, you might see a difference. Let's be real. What about bokeh? So bokeh, shallow depth of field, blur background, separating, usually for like a portrait or something, separating that item or that person from the background. So that's all based on your focal length and how wide your aperture is. That determines depth of field, not sensor size. But as a sidebar, when you have a larger sensor, you have a larger field of view, and so to get the same field of view with a smaller sensor, you have to use a shorter focal length, and it's really that causes the less bokeh or the less shallow field. So, but you absolutely can get a shallow depth of field. You can get a blurred background with an APS-C camera. You might have to step further away from the image, or you might have to use a wider aperture to do that. It's never going to be quite as spectacular as full frame, but it's going to look just fine. Not much of an issue in most instances. I think if I was strictly a portrait photographer, I'd want full frame for that reason. But if I was doing mixed stuff, including portraits, wouldn't make much difference at all to me. So on these major parameters, low light performance, shallow depth of field, dynamic range, they're all, full frame's better, then down, APS-C, a little bit down from that, micro four thirds, but all excellent. How about focusing? Well, focusing is really more to do with the cameras. APS-C cameras, have excellent focusing. Full frame cameras have excellent focusing. Micro four thirds cameras have excellent focusing, and it's going to determine what's going to determine that is the grade of the camera. So this pro level camera, Olympus, is going to have somewhat better focusing than this little guy here. But they all have great focusing and really are going to do just fine for most everything that you're going to need them for, except for maybe very erratic sports or things, or if you're paying the rent on your sports footage or something, your sports pictures, maybe then you want the best that you can get. So we're saying that they're not quite as good. Why would you even consider it? Just because it's good enough? Well, probably not. I think that here again, it all comes down to size and what that size means. So this small camera is super, super capable. This, like I said, if I'm going on a backpacking trip, and maybe if I even take a lens or two, God forbid, oh my God, this is half my backpack. This, not so much, even with the lens or two, not so much. It's very light, not so bad. It's going to be easy on a trip. So in situations where I need to travel more lightly, like a vacation, or even just going someplace, I want to shove this smaller thing in a large coat pocket or something, I absolutely can do that and still get excellent images. Now, the electronics are the same, whether you're putting it in this body or this body, but generally speaking, a micro four thirds camera, top of the line, is going to be less expensive than a top of the line full frame camera, although they still have the same electronics. The other thing is that most micro four thirds cameras, all Olympus cameras and most Panasonic cameras, have in-body image stabilization. So you don't have to necessarily put that in the lens. If it's not in the lens is going to be smaller, lighter, and cheaper. So now if I pack more than one lens, I'm getting an advantage there. Because the sensor is smaller, I'm going to have more of a cropped view. That does a couple of things. So it means that I can have a smaller glass, less glass in my lens. That's going to mean the lenses are significantly cheaper. So you can get super high quality lenses and good quality lenses for very reasonable prices compared to a full frame camera, or even compared to an APS-C size camera. That's phenomenal. So the lenses will be smaller, and because they have that crop sensor, let's say if this was a 150 millimeter lens here, that's going to give me the same field of view than if I had a 300 millimeter lens on this camera. So I can get by if I have a, let's say, a 70 to 200 millimeter lens on my little Micro Four Thirds camera. It's going to act like a 140 to 400 millimeter lens on this camera. That's phenomenal. Smaller, cheaper, lighter, more, greater, I mean, not really magnification, but magnification if you want to put that in quotation marks. Those are huge advantages to the Micro Four Thirds system. And in a lot of ways, a camera like this is going to be much more desirable for your typical consumer than a camera like this. Now imagine if you took this camera and you did what my watch does. So this is an Apple Watch. It communicates directly with my phone. I don't have to worry about it. It automatically connects via Bluetooth, and they talk to each other. Now just imagine, I know these apps are getting better all the time, but what happens if I could just automatically connect my camera to my phone's systems and actually do things like send a picture directly from here to Instagram or to Facebook. Maybe even have a little bit of an app in here where I could adjust the colors a little bit and maybe crop it or turn the, make it a square picture or whatever I need to do right on here, send it directly. It's going to use the electronics of my phone to connect to the cell tower and to make that exchange, but I'm not downloading to my phone and then modifying it and then uploading it from my phone to the social media site, right? Well, now you have an incredibly compelling product, and hopefully people at Olympus and Panasonic are going to do that. So I think the Micro Four Thirds system has great advantages over the larger full frame or even the APS-C. Now the differences when you go from this to this, they're great, right? When you go from APS-C to this, it's much smaller, but still, I think a little bit smaller lenses on this, a little bit, some advantages that way, a little slightly decreased image quality, but in the real world, it's just not going to make that much difference. When we're taking images, I think it's insane to take like a 60 megapixel image and then you post it on your WordPress site or your Facebook site or Instagram site, and you have to crunch it down into a 1 or 2 megapixel image. I mean, that's just nuts to spend all that money to do that. So why not start out with a camera that has the abilities that you're actually going to use, that you're actually going to take with you, and that's really a Micro Four Thirds system. So again, I'm not saying that Micro Four Thirds is better than full frame or than APS-C. I'm just saying that these are different approaches, and instead of looking at just the negatives of one system by bolstering up the positive of another system, we got to look at this in more of a total view. And I think for most consumers, even serious photographers, you're better off with an APS-C camera or a Micro Four Thirds camera than you are with a full frame camera. These are great for what they do, but these I could take a professional shot with this camera. I could take a vacation shot with this camera. They're pretty darn flexible. So if you have a different opinion, feel free to write it below. If you agree with me, feel free to write it below. If you want to subscribe, that would be awesome. I am trying to get to 5,000 viewers. It's only been, how many years? But that would be great. I'm at 4,000.99. So if I get to 5,000, that's a day of celebration for me. I know it's small, but for me, it's a big deal. Anyway, I would say if you get some time, you could listen to my podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed, on iTunes. You haven't updated it for a while, but there are hundreds of episodes on interesting psychiatric topics. If you want to know more about me, you could read my blog, drmikekuna.com, drmikekuna.com. It's a personal blog. If you want to know these deep inner secrets of me, read it. If you don't, of course, don't. I would just say we're in November now. It's November 4th. Today happens to be a beautiful day outside in Illinois, so I hope it's beautiful where you're at too. Have a great day, everyone, and bye-bye.